Hello, and welcome to our lecture on fungi, algae, and molds in our eukaryotic and prokaryotic module. And we will begin with talking about fungi, um, and let's dive in. So, fungi are typically chemoheterotrophic, right? So, chemoheterotrophic means that they require chemicals from other organisms, aka sustenance from other creatures. So they have to decompose them or, eat them, whether alive or dead. Cell walls are composed of chitin. That is the main question that you're going to see is cell walls are composed of chitin. I showed that meme and I'll post it again about the cell walls. Um, you guys have cell walls from the mycoplasmas? Um, anyway, Um, they don't perform photosynthesis because they don't have chlorophyll. Um, as we saw on our branching of life, we saw that they were actually more closely related to animals by a long shot than they were plants. And all of them have a means of asexual reproduction, um, but they also can have mitosis. And all of them can also reproduce through spores. So fungi are important because they decompose dead organisms, they help plants absorb water and minerals by creating a network that they decompose and add back to the soil. And they serve as research tools, and of course, you can eat them. And this is a fungus um, eating a nematode. I believe the nematode is dead. So you can have two basic types of fungi. Um, one are molds, and those are generally multicellular, um, and they are composed of long filaments called hyphae. And then the yeasts are unicellular fungi, right? So yeast for making beer, and that we will see in fermentation in the next chapter. Um, they are pretty useful for that. So yeasts are unicellular fungi. That's also where you get yeast infections from, and so on. Um, some fungi are dimorphic. They can be either one, and they can change their shapes depending on what they need to. Like we said, they acquire nutrients by absorption. Some trap and kill soil-dwelling nematodes, so alive or dead, they can eat them. And most fungi are aerobic. They need air, but we take advantage of the fact that yeasts are facultative anaerobes. When there is no oxygen available, they will begin to ferment. So when we give them sugar, we uh, make them ferment because we remove air. Then they produce beer, they produce yogurt, they produce all kinds of things. Budding and asexual formation are two other types that yeasts and other fungi can use to reproduce. Um, I would just know the names, budding and spore formation. And what I mean by spore formation is the diagram here. You can see you start out with copies of DNA, and you need to make them, and they get into the spore and will release as a haploid. And haploid just means half of the DNA that you require so that when it joins to another haploid, you get a diploid, or a full organism. Okay, and that is what we need to know about fungi, is that you have yeasts, that most of their cell walls are made of chitin, and they help decompose um, matter, and that they are most likely more useful to us than they are pathogenic to us. And algae as well kind of share that same class, that most of them are actually helpful for us rather than harmful. And sometimes they can be environmentally harmful by leaching nutrients from other species in the wild, but they're not actually pathogenic sometimes. So they're simple eukaryotic photoautotrophs. So we keep seeing these types of words, trophs. We'll get into that when we learn nutrition and metabolism. But for the time being, you would learn that photoautotrophs means that they self get their energy from light. Okay. They have sexual reproductive structures in which every cell can become a gamete, and they differ widely from species to species. They are generally aquatic and live in the photic zone of fresh, brackish water. And in fact, this type of um, area, and with algae and other microbes, are actually responsible for making more oxygen in the ocean than all the trees are. Algae has different morphologies. They can be unicellular, colonial, and even they can be these large ecosystems under the ocean. And it's just one giant organism held by a holdfast, easily named. And that holdfast will hold them tightly to a rock or other substrate on the ocean. All right, and we'll end with molds. Molds can definitely grow anywhere, um, and they are definitely not fun for humans, but also not necessarily fun for plants. Um, they differ from fungi in several ways because they're not actually fungi. They are molds. Um, They have cellulose cell walls, and that cellulose is also in the plant cell wall, so they're close to plants, at least with their cell wall. Their spores have flagella, and similarly to fungi, they do decompose dead animals and return nutrients, but a lot of times they are pathogens. They can get in your lungs, and they can cause wilt in plants. Okay, and we will finish up our last lecture on eukaryotes next, where we go over the other important eukaryotes, namely helminths and arthropods that carry pathogens.